Hi, I'm Jasper White, and today I'm going to show you how I make my home-style clam chowder. You can make clam chowder with cooked clams or with raw clams. I think for most people it's easier to start with cooked clams. So I took a nice pot with a tight-fitting lid. I washed my clams first, and then put enough water to get them started and steam them open. And now at this point I want to get them out of that broth and save that broth because that's the base for the chowder. And so I will take this and pour it into a strainer. And that way all the sand and everything, it stays out of the broth. And I've got some really nice, you can almost see by the color how strong that broth is, and that's what makes the chowder taste great. And then I'm going to take the clams and I'm going to set them aside. You can see they're all fully steamed. They take about 10 minutes to steam. Stir them once in the middle of the process, and I'll just let them cool off a little. And then later, I'm going to start the chowder. Later, while the potatoes cooking, I'll dice up all these clams. Now, to cook a home-style clam chowder, you can use bacon or salt pork, and I prefer salt pork. It has a cleaner flavor. It's actually more traditional. And so you start, first of all, when you buy salt pork, it should be nice and meaty, like the salt pork is. You cut the rind off because it's inedible, and then you cut it into a small dice, like that. And the trick to dicing it, to make it really easy, is to partially freeze it before you cut it. It makes it way easier to cut than if you don't. And then put it in the pan, cook it very slowly until it's nice and brown, crisp cracklings, and render all the fat out of the pan. And then at this point, it's nice and crisp. Some people take the salt pork out and garnish the chowder with it later. I leave it in so that the flavor goes in to the chowder. At this point, I'm going to add some butter and some chopped garlic, just a little bit. I'll give that just a minute. I have a bay leaf, a large one or two small ones, and some fresh thyme that I picked and chopped. Put that all in there and let that simmer for just a minute, just to get the garlic flavor expanded. Now I'm going to add onions, diced onions, which are cut into about a medium-sized dice, and then some celery, which is cut into an even smaller dice. I don't think people want to eat chunks of celery, but the celery gives it a really nice flavor. And at that point, I'll just cook that. I don't want to brown the vegetables, but I just want to cook them until they're nice and soft. So that will take about 5 minutes, 6 minutes to cook. And when they're nice and soft, we'll proceed with the rest of the recipe. Okay, so now I've cooked all the salt pork and vegetables and herbs all together, and you can see they're nice and soft, but they're not brown yet. And I don't want to brown them. I'm not looking for that extra flavor. And now I'm going to add the potatoes, and you can see I cut the potatoes in different sized pieces, and they don't have to be precise. In fact, they're better if they're not. That way, the small pieces melt and help thicken the broth, and the larger pieces are the chunks that you'll get in the soup. So I'm adding the potatoes. And the potatoes should be a medium starch, something like a Yukon Gold or a Maine Chef's potato. If it's low starch like a new potato, it doesn't thicken the chowder. If it's a high starch like an Idaho or a russet potato, it'll fall apart completely in the chowder. So a medium starch, all-purpose chef's potato is what you need. And now I'm going to add the broth that I strained. And it should be just enough to cover the potatoes. This chowder is going to be thick with ingredients, not with flour and roux or cornstarch or anything like that. And I'll put the flame all the way as high as it'll go, and I'll cover it. And the idea here is that I want to cook the potatoes really hard and fast and break the starch in the potatoes. And that's going to release and lightly thicken the broth. Again, I'm not trying to make a rich, thick, creamy chowder. I'm going to make a home-style, brothy, flavorful, full of chunks of clams and potatoes and vegetables. And so I'm going to cook that really hard. It should take about 10 or 12 minutes, and then we'll go back and we'll finish the chowder. So now the potatoes have cooked really hard for about 10 minutes, maybe 12 minutes, depending on the potatoes. And now all I'm doing is I'm taking my spoon, a slotted spoon here, and I'm just mashing a few of the potatoes against the side of the pot, and that helps break them up a little bit, and it helps to lightly thicken the broth. So, okay, so the potatoes are cooked, and basically the chowder is just about finished now. So I'm going to turn off the heat. I am going to add the clams and stir them in off of the heat. They don't really need any more cooking. I'm going to season it with pepper, black pepper, and it could happen that it might need salt, but it's really highly unlikely. If you have really fresh quahogs and you're using salt pork, that should put enough salt in the broth to season it. It's actually very salty without any added salt at all. And now I'm going to add heavy cream, which some people use milk or half and half. I think heavy cream is better. You can use less. It comes to about the same amount of fat, and I'm talking about a traditional clam chowder. Fat's not really an issue. It's got salt pork, butter, and cream in it. And I will taste it again. And add a little more pepper. And now the chowder is finished cooking, but it is not done. And probably the most important part of the chowder is what happens now. Now you turn it, you leave it off the stove, and you let it sit for at least a half hour to an hour. And that's called curing the chowder. And what happens during that hour is that all the flavors combine, and it goes from all these different flavors into one delicious flavor, which is clam chowder. You can also, at this point, refrigerate it, put it away till the next day, and then all you need to know about reheating it is that do not boil it again, and the heavy cream will not break in the chowder, but just reheat it slowly when you're ready to eat it, and do not let it boil. When it's hot, you dish it up. So I've let the chowder cure for about 45 minutes to an hour, and now I'm going to serve it. And the thing about chowder is that, you know, most people think of it as a soup kind of, and clam chowder can be served like a soup in a little cup, but really when you think of how rich it is and how complete it has protein, it has carbohydrate, it has fat. It's really a meal in itself, and I really think it's more suitable as a main course, like for a lunch or a light dinner. And I like to use a slotted spoon if I'm serving it like as a main course, and kind of mound the ingredients up in the middle a bit, and then ladle the broth around the outside. And like I said, chowder is a very complete, it's kind of a complete meal in itself, and it has all different flavors and good things. One thing it doesn't have is crunch, and it needs some crunch. So these are common crackers, and these are traditional to serve with chowder. You can use oyster crackers, saltines, whatever, but they come whole, and then you split them and butter them and toast them in your oven, and that adds the missing crunch to the chowder. And then I usually sprinkle a little fresh chopped parsley or chives on top of the chowder, and that is a delicious meal all unto itself. That's my home style clam chowder.